Here we are at part 2 of our 3-part series on theory as. And again, we're exploring the different views that individual people have of what counts as a theory. How would you describe a theory? And the 3 views are hypothesis, lens, and stance. Just like the definition of love, if you ask people what's love, different people will come up with different definitions, and these 3 views, hypothesis, lens, stance, are 3 common definitions or views of what is a theory that are in the field of research. People that are doing research and working with theories, these are 3 of the dominant ways that they might describe it. The view we're talking about here is the lens view. This is a little different than the hypothesis view, and it can be confusing because they seem to overlap, but the differences are important. So the lens view here, the theory is seen as a lens that colors or shapes what we see. So it's not some hypothesis we're trying to prove or disprove. Rather, the theory is an idea, a way of looking at the world, at relationships, so forth, that actually changes or alters how we interpret things. And that way we're looking through a specific perspective at the thing we're studying. So if you were to take a pair of glasses and maybe they're really dark glasses and you put those glasses on, it's going to make things look dimmer. And if you put a pair of literally rose-colored glasses on, then everything you look at is going to look a little more rosy. And so a theory is just like that. You put on this lens over your mind, over your eye, and it filters everything that you look at and think about and see, and so you're noticing things. You probably have experienced, for example, maybe you get a car and you didn't think about that particular type of car much beforehand, but now every car on the road seems to be like yours. You say, oh my gosh, these cars are so popular. I'm so glad I made this purchase. Obviously, if all the other people thought it was a good car, then I must have made a good decision too. There are so many ways that this happens. And it's not so much, the lens is not so much about buying a car, but rather that shows you that the view that you put on will change what you notice. You never noticed that car before. And so you put on a theory, you're trying on a theory, you're starting to think about the world through a particular theory, and all of a sudden relationships look quite different. And the world looks, you notice all kinds of things that you might overlook before. So from this view, theories are meant to provide answers to questions or solutions to problems. So you try on a particular set of glasses, in other words, a particular communication theory about your life, and it draws your attention to something. You put on a different pair of glasses, and it draws your attention to something else. In other words, it answers those questions that you have, or it provides a solution to those issues that you face. So lenses help us see the differences that make a difference. I first heard this phrase, awkward phrase, differences that make a difference, from a professor, Stan Dietz. I mentioned him in the previous video. He didn't invent it. I've since seen it all over the place in different research articles. But the idea is that the differences that make a difference, another way of saying that is that lenses help us see the small details that are meaningful. Lenses help us see those little changes that make a difference or really impact things. Now, what are the key things that'll change my life for the better, that'll change relationships for the better? Let me give you a brief example. If, for example, you think that giving lots of gifts in a romantic relationship is the thing that makes the difference, then that's a certain lens you have on about what makes a good relationship. And so it'll nudge you toward giving lots of gifts. And by the way, I'm not making light of that. A lot of people and even entire cultures are gift-giving cultures and individuals, and it may be one way that enhances your feelings of connection toward other people. So here lenses are meant to help us look through certain theories. That's the idea. The lens is you look through it, and then the idea there is because you can look through a lot of different theories, You want to choose the best theory, the theory that fits your situation the best. So if you're studying, let's say, a organization that's in the middle of a crisis and you want to figure out what the organization could do or should not do, then you have to have a set of concepts or a theory that helps you see the options very clearly for that particular situation. It's a lot like different, let's say you have high cholesterol and you go to the doctor. You want a solution that's going to fix things, right? So you want a match, the best match, third bullet here, that'll help you see the distinctions that matter the most in that given case. So you go in, you say, doctor, I have high cholesterol. And if that doctor says, okay, well, you need to play more ping pong because I love ping pong and I figured you'd be into ping pong. You might think, well, I'm not, okay, ping pong is great, I'll give you that, but I'm not sure it really fits. I don't think it matches my particular needs. And so, okay, then read more comic books. And I'm exaggerating here, of course. No, physicians aren't going to tell you these things, but I'm exaggerating to make the point. And you would say, no, I don't think comic books are going to work either. And he says, oh, I'll tell you what. There's this new medication that has been studied, and it really is very safe, and it actually lowers cholesterol. And you say, okay, that works. That helps me solve my problem. So that solution matches. And in the same way, our different communication theories need to match our particular issues. So you don't need a theory that might work for other people but not you. You need a theory, you need answers that help you. So let me give you an example of a theory that some people have challenged. There's a theory called social penetration theory, and we're actually going to talk about this later in the semester. It's not important that you remember this theory right now, but it's an illustration. Social penetration theory. So it says, hey, if you want to have close personal relationships and a bonding, an intimacy, emotional connection, then what you need to do is disclose. You want self-disclosure. Tell them things, tell your friends things they wouldn't necessarily know about you unless you told them. And then there'll be some reciprocity. In other words, they will reciprocate, or once you tell them something, they will tell you something about them. And then once you've both shared a little bit, then you'll feel closer. And there is some research that shows that this helps. However, if you look a little more deeply at the research, it might not work for everybody's situation. For example, females that share this way, disclose and then have mutual sharing or reciprocation, do tend to feel more bonded to each other, and they feel, oh, this is great, I really have a good friend here. And when females and males in like a mixed pair, for example, they disclose, they tend to feel like they connect more. However, it doesn't really work as well for male friends. So for example, if I want to hang out with my buddy and get more close with him, develop a deeper friendship, I suppose I could talk about more personal things, and then he would talk about more personal things, and then we would feel more bonded. That's fine, that's great. But most of the guys I talk to, that's probably not going to be the solution that they feel fits them the best. And in contrast, they'll say, well, when guys actually do activities together, so maybe they play some video games, they watch sports, they play sports, they go and do something outdoors, like go on a hike, they spend some time together, go to the shooting range or go hunting. They might actually talk very much at all in detail about all like matters of the heart, but it may help them bond. And so in other words, you can't say that any theory is a one-size-fits-all. It has to match the particular case. So if you throw social penetration theory at a bunch of guys and say, here, share your feelings, a lot of guys are going to look sideways at you and say, well, that might not be the very first step. So the point here is that you want a theory that fits. It matches. You want a theory that's going to make a difference. You need the differences that make a difference for your particular case. And the lens people fully admit, hey, we're people. All people have biases, and researchers are no different. And so theories that we make have biases. They're not saying that they have unbiased truth and truth with a capital T. They're saying that we should judge a theory in a particular case based upon its usefulness. So they're not interested in proving something. Their question that they ask is, how is it helpful for us to view things this way instead of other ways? And if you find a helpful answer, this particular medication helps lower cholesterol, that's the most important thing. You're not trying to figure out, this is a metaphor, but you're not trying to figure out what cholesterol medication is the best overall for everybody. What you're trying to figure out from this lens standpoint is which medication helps me the most, because they interact with people differently. Which communication theory is going to help me deepen my relationships with people, have a better marriage, have a more satisfying workplace relationship. And so they're looking for that match, that compatibility between circumstance and theory, looking for usefulness. There are some criticisms of the lens perspective. The first one is quality. A lot of times, especially from the hypothesis crowd, people will say, well, we're going to criticize that because some theories really do have a lot more evidence than others, and you're sort of saying that all theories are equal. Any lens is just as good as the next lens as long as it helps you. And so they're not all equal in the quality or rigor or amount of evidence, but you're sort of treating lenses as if they're all interchangeable and all you need is a good fit. So that's one of the criticisms. I'm a lens person, and really all semester we're going to talk about theories as lenses. I think that this criticism is partially true. I think sometimes we don't necessarily aren't as concerned as if there's a ton of evidence for it. We're more concerned with, does it help in a given situation? And so we expose ourselves to some criticisms that way. I think, however, over the long run, the theories that we apply to a circumstance will either shed light on a situation and be useful, or they won't be. And that is, I think, a fair test of whether or not we should hang on to a theory. The other criticism is one that involves morals. In other words, from the stance perspective, and we haven't gotten there yet, the stance crowd argues that not all theories are equal in the values they pursue. In other words, there's a moral imperative. This is the criticism. There's a moral imperative that you should be studying some things, and if you're not, then you're not really helping anything. The idea there is that some problems deserve more attention than others. The stance crowd faults the lens view for not paying attention to or taking a stance on pressing issues. For example, maybe the researcher is really into things like child trafficking, basically a modern form of slavery, right? And their theory and research is all angled in that direction. And they say to you, and so what are you working on? What research are you doing? And you're saying, oh, I'm looking, at reality shows, and which ones are the most real? And they might say, well, I mean, that's kind of interesting, but shouldn't you be doing something a little more important? See, there's the moral part coming out, right? Shouldn't you be working on human trafficking and that issue instead? And so they say, hey, some issues are more important than others. And so they criticize the lens perspective on saying, hey, whatever you want to study, you study, and whatever theory you're using, you should use. And so that's a criticism. That moral criticism from the stance crowd will make more sense once we've actually looked at the stance perspective. So that's the basic overview of the lens view of theories, the second of our 3 views. And it's really about trying on different eyeglasses, so to speak, different lenses that we look through to examine a situation, come up with good answers. It's not about trying to create a mirror or direct reflection of reality. That's looking in the mirror would be a reflection. This is a lens, a transparent lens or piece of glass that helps you, that shapes the way you see things and helps you pay attention to some things over others. And the next video is, of course, on the stance view.